There are comments. I love the comments. And a significant number of the comments, particularly after one or two of the videos related to the house that he has had built, and the spec house that we built, is why do the Americans always do stick-built homes? Those are throwaway homes. They are disposable, they're irresponsible, they're not sustainable. You should have built with stone or steel or composite or concrete. Well, it's an interesting controversy. And it is more interesting for me as a carpenter who's grown up in the timber capital of the nation, who has spent significant portions of my life logging, sawmilling, and building homes out of wood. Now, before you dismiss anything that I have to say based on my credentials of having come from a timber-based economy and spent my life as a wood carpenter, as a carpenter, I mean carpenters use wood, you need to know I've also worked on steel and glass structures. I've built composite decks. I have poured lots of concrete, both in walls, in commercial buildings, and in health clubs, and in bridges, and in abutments. I understand concrete, I like it, and I fabricate steel, and I blacksmith. So the four main food groups of construction, which are CMU, block, brick, concrete, steel, wood, and dirt, are familiar to me. I mean, I get it, or at least I think I get it. And so what I'm going to say next is not simply confirmation bias. I also have to say, before I go any further, that I love the environment that I live in. The environment's important. The ecology and the sustainability and the oxygen and the water and the food and all of these things affect me and my children and my grandchildren just like they affect you and your children and your grandchildren. So it's not like we are living vastly different lives on this beautiful blue planet. We're living the same life in different places, and I am not discounting or irreverent about our responsibility to be stewards of the earth. Now, the question about the sustainability of wood-framed houses is, to me, impossible to understand. Because of all the resources that exist, none are more renewable than wood. Wood grows. I tell you this not because of theoretical or textbook knowledge or the things that I've learned from newscasts. I tell you this because I've been a logger. And I personally have logged hillsides in Southern Oregon where I am making the third set of stumps. Process that for a minute. The first set of stumps, mostly decomposed, on some of the hillsides I've worked on, were large, old growth. 3 feet, 3.5 feet, 4 feet in diameter. Douglas fir. Patriarchs of the environment, right? An old growth Douglas fir tree is a beautiful thing. The second set of stumps was in the 2-foot range, 18-inch, 2-foot, maybe 28 inches. Southern Oregon grows timber in a hurry. And so the second set, also deteriorated, was smaller. And the third set that I was making ranged from 16 inches to 24 inches also. There's no question in my mind that there are hillsides that I was part of logging when I was 15 that have been logged again now by the time I'm 65. And the hillsides that I logged as a man in my 40s will be logged again before I die, and certainly once or twice more before my sons pass away. There's nothing more renewable than wood. Wood carbon sequesters. Wood creates a structure that is affordable. The comments from Europe, which are numerous and frankly fairly predictable, are you should have built with stone, you should have built with concrete, you should have built with brick. You're right. It's very permanent. It's very brittle. It is not safe in an earthquake, and we live in the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake area where sooner or later, we're about 60 years overdue, there's going to be a dandy earthquake here. And the stone and concrete buildings will probably all fall down or be compromised, all the bridges will be wrecked, and many of the wood homes will flex and stand and not kill the people that are inside and probably be habitable when it's done. Now, that's one of the objections to stone masonry as the proper way to build. It is proper. It's long-lasting and the maintenance is low and it's beautiful and I love it. But most people cannot afford it. Brick and stone veneers on houses in the western United States are primarily for the 1%, certainly for those who are wealthier than blue-collar folks. I don't know about our friends in Europe, but in the United States we have a housing crisis. Inflation has driven housing prices out of reach for most people. And so apartment dwellers, the increasing number of apartment dwellers, have to live in buildings that are built in such a way that the rent is affordable. Now, is greed part of the downside to this? You bet it is. You bet it is. Substandard construction and inflated rents are a reality of the human condition, and I deplore it. But just because greed is part of the calculus of people living in competition with each other for space and for funds, doesn't mean that the method of constructing buildings out of the renewable resource that exists here is somehow outdated. It's anything but outdated, particularly when it is combined with the modern fastening techniques, the Simpson hangers, the metal brackets and hangers and straps and stays and bolts, the seismic resistance that comes into structures that are properly connected with Simpson fasteners. There's really no way to beat it if you look at renewability, affordability, and survivability in an earthquake. If I lived in a tornado zone, maybe, certainly if I lived on the southeast coast and where hurricanes come ashore regularly, always have. I mean, Christopher Columbus wrote about the terrible storms he confronted in the Caribbean, so those were hurricanes, and they are nasty, and they will blow down anything except a concrete house. So I would be thinking probably about ICF or something. ICF meaning insulated concrete forms, a relatively new system for forming concrete walls which pushes the cost down and the versatility up enough that it's showing up in a lot of new houses. And a truss roof that's tied down properly, which introduces the idea that it's a mistake to brand a particular type of building material as being, on the face of it, inferior to another until you complete the calculation of who can afford it, how long it has to last, and the effect of shoddy workmanship on even the best structures. Shoddy workmanship on a brick or stone building is going to create something that you're going to be ashamed of or have to maintain or tear down, in the same way that shoddy workmanship on a Western platform framed wood structure is going to make something that can't be trusted, doesn't have value, and maybe will not even qualify for long-term financing because it didn't pass a final inspection. So Matt Reisinger is right. The whole spectrum of workmanship and craftsmanship and who can afford to do the work correctly and who can you find to do the work correctly is the real criteria on whether or not a particular building material is respectable or not. So if there's a takeaway from this video, besides the fact that Wadsworth goes over the top on the things he's passionate about, it's that you should be a little hesitant to tar every method and every material and every process that you may not be familiar with the same black brush. You should be hesitant to jump into one camp without the advantage of having some first-hand experience or talking to someone who has first-hand experience. You should be hesitant to label one process as being, on the face of it, superior or inferior to another, and instead understand that there's every level of expertise and quality available in every type of construction, or really any endeavor that humankind sets its hand to. So just to wrap this up, I mean, if anything is obvious in this conversation, it's that I get exercised on this topic, but I have reason for that. There are some takeaways. Don't invest yourself too deeply in any particular camp unless you have first-hand experience with what is being discussed. You don't have to believe every single thing that you see on the nightly news, including the things that happen to resonate with your confirmation biases. I try to do that, and I fail about as often as I succeed. Let's all just anchor down on the idea that any process, any material can be done well or done poorly. Let's anchor down on the notion that there is greed, that there is graft, that there are the seedier aspects of human nature in every society and every culture. If you have comments or observations about, the sustainability of concrete or steel, if you have ideas or insights on other building methods or materials or approaches that could provide maybe an answer to housing shortages and sustainability, if you've seen something somewhere that needs to be brought to a wider audience as it pertains to what do we do to house the people that need housing? What answers are there? And not just social answers or political answers, but construction answers for providing housing for folks, because folks need housing. And if you've never flown over Oregon, if you've never driven through our Coast Range, which is a checkerboard of newly logged ground and newly replanted ground, and second growth that's 30 and 40 and 50 feet high, and old growth and second or third growth that's ready to be harvested again, if you haven't seen the beautiful condition of Oregon, the West Coast, growing trees just as fast as it can, then reserve judgment till you have. And if you're one of those who thinks that there are no trees left in Oregon, well, that's only because you have never road hunted in Oregon. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.